Well, good evening, everyone in Alberta, Canada, and beyond. It is Wednesday, December 20th, just a few more days until Christmas. And I'm Kerry Lambert, and I welcome you to an online webinar, Evening of Solutions for a New Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project, also known as APP. APP's purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and sovereignty by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship with Canada. Of course, we couldn't do this without your help. If you can, please share this webinar. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Rumble, as well as after this live, we're also on other video and audio sites like Apple, Spotify, Vimeo, etc. These webinars do take a lot of time and effort, and we're starting with sponsorships for our webinars. If you'd like to sponsor an upcoming webinar, you can be a business or a group or an individual, and contact us at contact@albertaprosperityproject.com. Actually, no, change that. Contact@albertaprosperity.com. I'll put that up there, which is also on the top of the albertaprosperityproject.com website. And with that, tonight's sponsor is actually anonymous. It's not the name anonymous. It's actually just someone said, you know what? I really enjoy what you guys doing. I don't have a business, but I want to be able to get the word out on this and support you guys. So we had a bit of a conversation, and they were wanting to sponsor. I'm going to tell you what they're going to sponsor. They're going to be sponsoring. I don't have this page set up already. Here we go. They're going to be sponsoring the Chris and Kerry Show New Year's Eve extravaganza, I could call it that. And it's at the Baymont Inn in Red Deer. And actually, I've got a little video. I'm just going to play that right now for your entertainment. Now let's give this a shot. I'll turn it up a little bit. Let me know if you can hear it. So, Chris and Kerry Show present New Year's Eve 2024 at the Baymont Inn in Red Deer. 6 p.m. cocktail, 7 p.m. dinner, DJ and karaoke with yours truly, DJ Karaoke. Midnight champagne, party favors, and how much is it? Early bird pricing is $99 per adult before Friday. But if you're an Alberta Prosperity Project member and you use the coupon code New Year's Eve or NYE 2024, I'm going to put that up there right now on the screen there. You get your tickets for $75 each. And it's such a deal because it's $125 per adult after. So you got to get your tickets before Friday. So it's a last minute blitz. Do this. And yes, again, if you're an Alberta Prosperity Project member and use a coupon code NYE 2024 before then, you'll get your tickets for only $75 each. And you can go to thechrisandkerryshow.com. And there it is. And that gives you a little bit of information about it, what the dinner is going to be like, what the banquet hall is set up, etc., etc. So I'd like to just acknowledge our sponsor for doing that. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you guys at New Year's Eve for sure. And with that, we're actually on a Christmas holiday break, believe it or not, for the next 3 weeks. So I came up with this plan where, you know what, we all need a break. Let's just take 3 weeks off. We'll show the best 3 webinars of the year, and we'll go with that. And that didn't work out well at all, because here I am actually doing this live right now, and I was actually hoping to be able to take a little bit of a break. But no, I'm here. I'm actually live. I'm still going to be answering your questions and putting up comments and stuff like that. But yes, so we're replaying. I'm going to say the top 3 of the top 10 APP webinars of 2023. We actually did over 40 episodes this year, 40 episodes, if you can believe it, as well as I don't even know how many episodes we did of the Chris and Kerry Show. So, and you can always go to thechriskerryshow.com to check that out. But there were so many to be able to pick of a top 10. So what we did was the one today, we'll talk about in a second. But next week's is with Marty Up North, who is a brilliant Twitter podcaster. And the discussion is, can Alberta afford to stay in Canada much longer? Brilliant. And especially, I like doing these sorts of replays because even though that particular one I think was done in April, you'll see, wow, there has been so much of a change that's happened within those 8 or 9 months. And then the one that we're replaying on January 3rd is a discussion on the Alberta pension plan, and that's with Tanner today. And we did that one in October. So for the most part, it's all relevant, and it all kind of meshes together when we're going to be starting our new year, or in the new year, we're going to be starting our events again. And we're going to be touring across Alberta. And we're going to be talking about the Alberta pension plan. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that in the new year as well. And if you want to know what my top 10 list of all these webinars that we've done the entire year, one way that you can do that is we're going to be posting that on the APP newsletter, which is sent out every Monday. And you only get that if you're an APP member. So with that, I'm hoping you guys are all APP members. And if you're not, please do sign up. We enjoy. It's not like we need your $20, but it just kind of keeps the lights on, as well as being able to get a good email list so that we can get back to you and spread the word and grow our membership. APP memberships are 1 year for $20, 2 years for $30, 3 years for $40, or if you're so inclined, you can also make a donation at albertaprosperityproject.com. The other thing I wanted to tell you about is another event that we've got going on, and it is the Tucker Carlson event going on. So Tucker is with Daniel Smith and W. Brett Wilson in Calgary on Wednesday, January 24th. But that night, he's being whisked away from Calgary up to Edmonton, and we're presenting as well as a whole bunch of other groups to get him up in Edmonton. And look at that. He is coming with special guest Conrad Black and Rex Murphy. So if you're an APP member, you can actually go to your web. It was in the newsletter, but you know what? I'm going to post the link as well. I'm going to do that right now. I don't know if I can, but you know what? I'm going to do it anyways, because I think everyone should be willing to go, should be able to go. I'm going to put that in the comments right now. So there's the link if you wanted to get the tickets. So I think we've got 100 tickets, and the tickets are offering tier 3 tickets. I can't read on this screen. Tier 3 tickets at a special rate of $175 all in. This price saves you on any extra fees or taxes for your ticket, saves you about $25. So I think the ticket base value price is like $175, but you know how Ticketmaster, whatever, they all take their cut. I think it works out to $199.50 or something. If you buy the tickets through this particular link, and the seats are great. Row 104, 118. So you're only four rows off the center, I guess, or section 104, I should say, rows 5 to 10. So I mean, you're right where you want to be, without paying ridiculous prices. And I think everyone should be there because it will be an amazing evening. And so with that, I mean, there's so much other stuff that I could be talking about, and I'm going to leave that to the end. We're going to play the episode. Please do ask questions, put comments in, etc., etc. And I will do my best to be kind of manning the fort here. And in the meantime, maybe you won't even notice that I'm actually changing, but let's see if I can do this very, very quickly. Is you can register for a petition to establish Alberta's independence page at bit.ly/ABVotesYes. And I'm going to put that up on the screen right there. That's where you can go. And just in case anybody's really interested in, look at the shirt I'm wearing. Can anybody see that? Is that the nicest shirt you have seen in a long time? Yeah, that's an Alberta flag, people. Alberta flag. So, what are we talking about tonight? Well, let me tell you. Tonight's webinar is entitled A History of Alberta Independence Movement, and our guest is author and researcher Michael Wagner, a good friend too. And this is a live webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions and make comments throughout this presentation. Just put 3 question marks before your question, so it'll be flagged and we can quickly view the questions as we go through or even at the end. And with that, I'm going to bring Mr. Wagner on now, and he will tell you a little bit about himself. How are you, Michael?
Not bad. And yourself?
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. I love your shirt. It's a great shirt.
I know, isn't it? You can't really tell when it's just sitting like this.
Yeah. You got to stand up for that one. So,
yeah, I was just going to say, tell us a little bit about yourself. And obviously, I know who you are, and probably many APP chapter viewers, anybody that's gone out to see you speak. But please enlighten us. Tell us who you are.
Well, I guess like for the purposes of this webinar, my main qualifications are I've written a couple of books about the Alberta Independence Movement. I mean, it's something actually that I got involved with originally when I was a teenager in the early 80s. And, I wasn't involved consistently all this time, but it was something that sure stuck with me. And so in 2009, I wrote a book. Okay, that's my second book. That's my book from 2021, No Other Option.
Okay.
And if you go down a bit, maybe a few more down there. Okay, there's Alberta Separatism Then and Now. That is a history of the Alberta Separatist Movement, or Alberta Independence Movement. So I wrote that in 2009. And that, goes back to the origin of the independence movement, which is around 1970. It was anyway during the Pierre Trudeau's first term in office. So it goes from that time to 2009 when I wrote the book. So the main focus is, around the early 1980s when we had the National Energy Program. That's when the independence movement was very strong. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I wrote that in 2009. There was no interest in the book at that time because Stephen Harper was prime minister and there was basically no independence movement. And so the book seemed dead at the time and it didn't, so the timing was off. But in recent years, finally, there's been some interest in it because of what's been going on. So that's the history of the independence movement. Then the book at the top of the list there that we showed earlier, No Other Option. That's a book that I wrote in 2021 to advocate why Alberta should become independent. I mean, there's, of course, lots of historical information in there as to why Alberta should become independent, but it also explains, why it's constitutional now for Alberta to become independent and some other things like that. So those are the books I've written. That's probably my main qualification as to why, I can speak at Alberta Prosperity Project and why people would be interested.
And obviously, just by writing, you're quite the researcher because, I mean, there's so much history in terms of knowing that. And the thing about Alberta Prosperity Project, it just didn't come into existence. This has been a long conversation happening. Well, again, you would know, like probably since Confederation, or not Confederation, since we were brought in 1905 as Alberta, but definitely probably the early 70s.
Yeah, I mean, the West has felt, unfairly treated right from the very beginning. I mean, even when you think of this part of Canada, that when it was Rupert's Land, purchased by Canada from the Hudson's Bay Company, and there was people living here and they were not consulted, like they were not asked what they wanted, their political future to be. So you've got the people like Louis Riel and the other people in the Red River settlement, and suddenly a governor shows up from Canada saying, "I'm your governor," and I was like, "No, I don't think you are our governor." and he had a lot of guys supporting him who had guns, and so to make a long story short, that led to some negotiations, which ended up in the creation of the province of Manitoba. But and then there's other things after that too, where the West has felt unfairly treated. So the West has always felt that way, but the idea that Alberta or that the West should become its own independent country, that did not really take off until Pierre Trudeau's time in office, in the late 60s to early 70s.
Yeah, I know. We actually, you and I are actually in the Rebel News movie, and I'm going to just quickly look for it.
Sure.
Ungovernable.
Yes.
In which you basically tell the story just in a minor version of where we are and how we got to where we are. How we got to where we are. Oh, it says premium content. I'll bring it up anyways. If anybody wants to log in, I do have premium content, but probably just not loaded onto this particular site. But if you go to just rebelnews.com and look for Ungovernable, and if you are a Rebel News subscriber, I think it's like $8 a month or $5 or whatever. Just sign up. You'll get access to this movie, and it's excellent. Kian Simone was the producer and videographer for most of it, and again, the great thing is you get people like Michael Wagner coming on and speaking about the history of where we were and where we were, where we are now, and hopefully where we can be soon.
Yeah. Actually, I think Ungovernable is free on YouTube and Rumble.
It probably is. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
just actually because Walter just put a message there, but I watched it on YouTube. Well,
okay.
I mean, I'd seen it in the when they brought it to Edmonton in October. I was there at the
That's right.
launch of it. So
that's right. Great. So why don't we actually start? I guess at the beginning about like I know you and I have known each other for a year, anyways, a year plus, and you did a speech at the Independence Party AGM, and that's kind of where I first met you. And then you did another speech at the one that came up, and you had said to me that you did this speech the entire year, right? Every event you went out to, you basically had the same thing. And now you said when we were talking the other day that you've actually changed it because things have changed, and you wanted to spice it up a little bit. So I'm not sure if that's the way you want to talk about things going for tonight. Does that make sense for you?
Sure. Well, it goes chronological. The one that I had been delivering last year, like a number of people heard it, and I was hearing of people who'd heard it 3 or 4 times, and I thought, oh boy, I don't think they want to hear that same thing. So I thought for the one this year, I better have a different emphasis. I mean, a lot of the information cannot change because you don't change the history, but there were things that I could bring in that I hadn't talked about last year.
That's right.
But last year's talk in particular was just to show, the kind of the provocations against Alberta from the time of Pierre Trudeau and the different proposals that various people had brought up, because the main point that I was making in that is, there's so many people who would like to reform Canada and make things better for Alberta that way. And that makes perfect sense. But the thing is that people have been talking that way for almost 50 years and trying different things for 50 years. So, at some point, these various things, if they keep failing, we should try something different. And independence is that route. But it certainly begins under when Pierre Trudeau became prime minister. One of his main reasons for getting involved in politics was to make Quebec feel at home throughout Canada. So one of his main original policies was the Official Languages Act, which would make French much more prominent in English Canada. And in particular, as far as we were concerned, it was making French much more prominent in the prairies. And a lot of the people here were not happy with that. Like, why do we need to have French all over when there's hardly any French-speaking people here? It was done for Quebec. And so a lot of people were kind of offended by that. And that was kind of the original movement to create organizations for making the West an independent country, were probably based on those kind of cultural considerations. But that wasn't a deep enough kind of provocation like to spread widely and to really get the movement going. But it didn't take long. Like in 1973, there was a war in the Middle East, and as a result of that, oil prices skyrocketed, and that changed everything, because one of the things that Pierre Trudeau did was he brought in an export tax on oil. Now, that doesn't sound very exciting. That sounds like a pretty bland kind of thing, but it was a very, very important thing, because there had never been anything done like that before, because Alberta owns and controls its own resources, and oil is, Alberta, that's a provincial jurisdiction, and the federal government was taxing our resources as we exported them to the United States. And it was a very big tax. So money that should have been coming to Alberta for our resources was being funneled to Eastern Canada. And so it was that export tax on oil was a very big issue in the 1970s. And in 1974, Premier Peter Lougheed pointed out just in 1974 that the export tax on oil was costing Alberta between $800 to $1,000 for every citizen of Alberta every year. Like $800 to $1,000. That's a lot of money. There wasn't as many people in Alberta at the time, but that's a lot of money. Then, of course, also Pierre Trudeau mandated a lower price on oil within Canada. So when we sold our oil to the United States, the federal government would skim off a whole bunch of that money. And when we sold it within Canada, we had to sell it at like somewhere near half the world price, or maybe a bit more than that. So regardless of where we sold our oil, we were getting ripped off, and Central Canada, for the benefit of Central Canada. So Peter Lougheed, our premier, was fighting Trudeau throughout the 70s over those kinds of things, trying to get a better deal for Alberta. But, there's only so much he could do. Then in 1979, there was an election where Pierre Trudeau lost, and he lost to Joe Clark. Joe Clark was leader of Progressive Conservatives. It was just a minority government. Like, that government in and of itself is not important. But what is important is when Joe Clark's minority government fell, there was another federal election for February of 1980, and Pierre Trudeau decided to come back, to make a comeback, running as a Liberal leader. And this election campaign is very important, because the Liberals and Pierre Trudeau consciously decided to run a divisive anti-Western campaign as a way of getting back into power. They're saying Alberta is a troublemaker with, they want to benefit more from their oil resources. They're the troublemakers. You put us back in power and we'll take care of Alberta, And so they won a large majority government, on that basis, essentially. And so right after that, they brought in the National Energy Program, which was just a horrendous policy against Alberta, to expand government control of the oil industry. Some of their justifications were that it was to Canadianize the industry, like many of the companies in the oil industry were American companies. Mm-hmm. And so the Liberals didn't like that, and they wanted to have more government, Canadian government control, Canadianization. They also said that they could have a direct our oil industry more towards self-sufficiency for Canada. Well, those were their public justifications. Yeah. But a few years later, after they were out of government, the energy minister of that time, who was Marc Lalonde, he admitted publicly after they lost power that those were not the real justifications. Their real justification was to take money away from Alberta and to get it to the federal government. I mean, that's what people thought, but they were saying, no, we've got these other reasons for it. But anyway, it was a very terrible thing for Alberta. Thousands of jobs were lost. Businesses closed down. Homes were foreclosed. It was just a horrible time. And I'm not sure if you've met people, but I've met people who can tell me back in those days what happened to their families, how they lost homes and jobs and stuff like that. Exactly. There's still people. It was that bad, and people haven't forgotten it. Yeah. So anyway, to make a long story short, Trudeau ended up resigning, and there was an election in September 1984 where Brian Mulroney's Conservatives won, and all of the Alberta MPs were Conservatives, and Brian Mulroney, he was supposed to be not as socialistic as Trudeau. We thought, okay, everything's going to be okay. But even Mulroney, he was an MP from Quebec, and many of his MPs were from Quebec. And so in 1986, Canada needed to have a maintenance contract for its CF-18 fighters. Like, Canada had recently bought the CF-18 fighters. They need to be maintained somewhere. And there was only two cities with the facilities, Winnipeg and Montreal. Yeah. So the federal government held a competition to see which of these two companies, the one in Winnipeg or the one in Montreal, would be the best, for maintaining the fighters. And based on the government's own criteria, the company in Winnipeg was the best company to do it. So Winnipeg should get it. Well, sure enough, they didn't. They gave the contract to Montreal, even though Winnipeg had won, because that would get them more votes in Quebec, right? So
I grew up in Winnipeg, and I remember when that happened, and that was front page news and the Free Press, like for what I remember was months. And it was a hot topic because there were supposed to be jobs coming in. Was that through Bristol? I think that was Bristol.
That's right, Bristol Aerospace, yes. Mm-hmm.
So I had a buddy that his dad used to, well, he worked there. He was an estimator or something like that. And I remember going over to his house, and his dad would just be yelling in the kitchen about, how much the government sucked back then. And, if we only knew now, right?
Yeah. Well, that's neat. You're the first person I've met, that remembers that from Manitoba.
I do, and actually, just because that would have been about 84, right? Somewhere.
It was 1986. Yeah.
Okay, so then just a couple of years after that, my brother and I were DJs back then, and we would actually work at the Canadian Force Base Westwind, which is basically Winnipeg. And it was the same sort of conversation that we would have then, is that with like the officers, where do you get your planes maintained and all that? Well, actually, for the most part, it was not done in Winnipeg. They ended up shipping them out, and I forget exactly the story with that, but yeah, like Winnipeg totally got screwed. So it was, it was, even back then, the West was just alienated.
Right? Yeah. And the funny thing was, even though that was a Manitoba Winnipeg thing, like I was living in Calgary, and it was really a big thing in Calgary too. I mean, that's where Preston Manning and everything was. Like, people were really, really angry. Like, this was done to us, like the West, not just to Winnipeg and Manitoba. And so and that was probably the biggest single factor in the creation of the Reform Party. Preston Manning had the idea previously, I think, of having a Western Party, but he knew that there had to be some kind of instigating event, to bring people together, and that essentially was that instigating event. And I remember, like, it wasn't long after that they started holding their meetings, for forming first with the Reform Association, and then founding the Reform Party. And so that it was on the back of that CF-18 issue. But Alberta, was always the key province. I mean, there was a lot of support in Manitoba and Saskatchewan and even BC, but Alberta was always kind of the headquarters for that. So the Reform Party really began to take off in the late 1980s. And Westerners just knew something needed to be done. And so we did. In 1993, almost all of Alberta's MPs, not everyone, but most of them, were Reform Party in the 1993 election. Also, lots from Saskatchewan and BC. I can't remember if Manitoba did too many in 93. They did in 97, like the next election that Manitoba sent more. But this was our Western Party, and this party was formed with the purpose, their slogan was "The West wants in." You know what I mean? It was not a separatist movement at all. It was like, look, we just want what's ours. We just want a voice in the national discussion. You know what I mean? Like we're left out. Like let us in. If we have a voice too, maybe these decisions won't go against us every time. Maybe we'll get to say something, and maybe we can win sometimes and not lose every time. So we sent, in 93 and 97, overwhelmingly from Alberta and from many of the other Western provinces, we sent Reform Party MPs to Ottawa to get us in. Like another one of their major programs was what was called the Triple E Senate. That'd be a Senate that would be elected with equal number of senators from each province and would have effective powers. Because many people in Alberta and the other Western provinces thought, if we had a Triple E Senate where each of the provinces were represented equally and we had this power and they were elected, the government would not be able to push through policies like what happened with the CF-18 fighter jet maintenance contract or the National Energy Program. We'd have enough senators to block those kind of policies, So that was a big thing. But again, people in Eastern Canada are not interested in the Triple E Senate because it takes away power from them. They like the way the current system works because they have all the power, right? So it's pretty hard to go to someone who's got all the power and say, give me some of that power. They're like, who would say yes? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the Reform Party was the biggest single effort by the West to change the system to make things work for us too. You know what I mean? It wasn't that we were trying to take everything over. We just wanted our voice in there. And Eastern Canada said no, no. And when you look at how much effort, how many, think of all the thousands of Westerners or tens of thousands of Westerners who gave donations to the party and campaigned for the party and worked for the party over like a period of 10 years and still, no, we don't want you. You know what I mean? And so what my conclusion would be, like in the talk I was giving last year, if that level of effort by Westerners will not fix the system, then it cannot be done. Like we've tried to fix the system. I mean, that's the biggest one. There's other smaller efforts and stuff, but I'm just want to focus on what's really this big thing. Nobody can tell me that, we can do better than the Reform Party. Like, are you kidding me? If you lived through that period of time and all the effort and stuff that went in there, how could we mobilize that amount of effort again? You know what I mean?
That's right.
I just don't see how it could be done.
And they were from Calgary, essentially, right? So we had Joe Clark, who was the prime minister. Now, granted, minority government didn't last that long. And of course Preston Manning with the Reform Party, so he has the voice of the West. And again, we had Brian Mulroney, who was from Quebec, but essentially a PC conservative. And even with all that, we still can't get anything good out for the West.
That's right. Yeah.
We've had the conversation. I should show up some slides if I can find them very quickly. Just in terms of what election was that, like in 2010 or whatever it was, in which there was the federal election and all the West is blue, absolutely all West is blue, and then you get a sprinkling of red Liberals in and around Montreal and in and around Toronto, and guess what? The Liberals get in, because that's where the majority of the votes happen. That's where the majority of the population is. And they just totally forget about what's happening out West.
Actually, that kind of picture where the West is blue and Toronto and Montreal are red and they win, that's basically the 2019 election and the 2021 election.
I'm going to look for that.
Oh, okay. But most, if you look at the last, since the Reform Party folded into the Canadian Alliance and the Conservative Party, so that was in 2003. So from the 2004 election onwards, probably the West is always blue. And then before that, it's Canadian Alliance. Before that, it's the Reform Party. Of course, the Canadian Alliance was basically just a version of the Reform Party. And before that, it was blue again. Like the West has been blue. Actually, it was Diefenbaker made the West blue in the late 50s. So with the Conservatives. So one form or another, we've had Conservatives. But yeah, even Mulroney, which we thought would be our savior, he didn't work. And then Stephen Harper, I just got to give him. He did have a better government for the West than some of the other people, but he didn't make any of the fundamental changes that we needed. So once Harper was gone, we're back to square one, with Justin Trudeau. So the Harper years are better for the West, relatively speaking. Yeah. But still none of the fundamental changes that could have, prevented problems for the future were done. Not that he didn't try. I mean, he did try some Senate reform, but that was blocked by the Supreme Court. So, but I just want to give some credit for Stephen Harper. I'm not saying that he fixed the problem. I'm just saying that, he did what he could within the system. I mean, the problem isn't a particular person. The problem ultimately is the system. We have a system where Ontario and Quebec can elect a federal government between those two provinces, right? And so the people we vote for, end up in opposition and can't influence the policies the way we want. So it's the structure of the system. I don't see how we can get any, well, the way Canada is structured, it should be more of a federal system where the provinces have more power. You'd think, we own and control our resources. We should be able to develop them and export them without being interfered with federal government. But the federal government is interfering, with the No More Pipelines bill and the Alberta tanker ban and the carbon tax. These are ways in which the federal government is kind of subverting the Constitution. Like, they're not directly attacking the constitutional rights of Alberta, but they go around the Constitution and they bring in policies that essentially prevent Alberta from, exercising its provincial rights and responsibilities. So federal government, one way or another, is able to block us. And in a real federal system, they wouldn't be able to block us. We'd be able to do, export our products without them blocking us, kind of thing. So, and the Supreme Court, of course, has upheld Trudeau's carbon tax. So that means, and that again, that's a violation of certainly one of the dissenting judges in that decision, Russell Brown, he said openly that decision, was circumventing the province's jurisdictions. And so we know that we'd have some sympathizers on the Supreme Court, but not very many. But they do point out how the federal policies are undermining our constitutional rights. So, but we can't trust the Supreme Court's not going to defend our constitutional rights. And I mean, if they did, that'd be different, but they can't, or they won't. I should say they won't. They could, but they won't. But so we need to get out if we want to be able to develop our own resources and have our own freedoms. So.
Well, that's all good. All good information to know. I'm not sure, there's so much to talk about in this topic, but obviously something has just happened in the last day or two that has really struck a nerve with why we wanted to do this live tonight in terms of independence and what the hell is really going on in Canada. I'm going to bring this up just because it's such a good thing. So we had federal justice minister, he basically said that he was going to rescind the 1930s natural resource transfer agreement with the provinces. And according to this, it says this would pose an unprecedented risk to national unity, and Alberta condemns this federal threat, blah, blah, blah. And that's what was put forth by our Premier, Daniel Smith. And then we had Dr. Jordan B. Peterson reply back, reject, rebel, separate if necessary. Right. So do you know anything about what actually is in the 1930 Natural Resources Transfer Agreement?
Like, I don't know too much detail, but basically see that the prairie provinces, when they were formed, they were not formed as first-class provinces. Like, they didn't have the same rights as other provinces because the natural resources, were controlled by the federal government, which was different. Like, the other provinces owned and controlled their own natural resources. The prairie provinces didn't. Now, there are some reasons for that. One is that, like, as I mentioned, the prairie provinces essentially had been Rupert's land, and Rupert's land was purchased by the government of Canada. So they had to borrow a bunch of money to do that. So it was the taxpayers of Eastern Canada who actually purchased the land. Now, Ontario and Quebec benefited directly from that because some of the Rupert's land was given to Quebec, that's northern Quebec. Some of Rupert's land was given to Ontario, that's northern Ontario. But see, the maritime provinces, they helped pay for it, but they didn't get any land out of it. So the maritime provinces actually didn't. The maritime provinces wanted the federal government to maintain control so that some of that income, the Maritimes would benefit from some of the money that they felt that they felt they helped pay for the land. So they wanted something out of it, right? They weren't getting territory. So that was one of the reasons why it took a bit longer. Also, too, the federal government was settling the prairies. Like, they brought in the pioneers to pioneer and settle land and create farms, and they were afraid.
Built the train system, I guess.
Yeah, the federal government put the trains out there, but the federal government felt that they were concerned that if the provinces owned and controlled the resources, that they would be able to inhibit some of the settlers coming in. Like, they were concerned of the first settlers getting in and saying, well, we're closed now, forget it, we don't want any more people in here. Anyway, so the federal government felt they needed control so that they could fully settle the West. So there were some, you could understand why they would feel it wasn't just a malicious, avarice kind of perspective of getting the money. They thought they had reasons for this, but anyway, certainly by 1930 those reasons were not valid anymore, and so that the natural resources were transferred to the prairie provinces so that the prairie provinces would be equal with the other provinces. So but now with the Constitution, the Constitution gives each of the provinces their ownership and control of natural resources. So I don't see any way that could be rescinded. I mean, Justice Minister Lametti kind of brought it up. He said he would take a look at it, but it is, it's kind of a careless comment for him to make, and it's his fault that this got started. He could have said something different and not got this going.
Wow.
But I mean, one of the so I don't think that anything's actually going to transpire from that in particular. But what's really interesting about this is Jordan Peterson, because Jordan Peterson, I mean, he's originally from Alberta. That's one reason to be proud of him. He's a great guy. He's one of the major public intellectuals in the world, perhaps the most public intellectual in the world, and certainly in the English-speaking world. And here he is giving legitimacy to the idea of Alberta becoming independent. Reject, rebel, separate if necessary. So you'll have hundreds of, like 250,000 people saw that tweet from the picture you got there. Like 250,000 people. Most of those people would not be in Canada. They're hearing for the first time, someone with credibility saying maybe Alberta should become independent. You know what I mean? So this gives the idea of Alberta independence considerable credibility in areas where people had never thought of this or considered this before. Now, for me personally, the only way I would amend that was take off if necessary. But I mean, he's a very prominent person. He can only say so much. And
that's right. Just that.
That'd be good enough for me for sure. But I mean, when I realized the significance of that, it was actually, it was Walter who pointed that out, how significant that is with someone with such standing and such respect. I don't think the idea of Alberta independence has ever received that degree of credibility from that stature. You know what I mean? So in and of itself, even though the Lametti's comments and what comes of it will probably not amount to anything, this is very significant that the idea itself is being spread by someone who's very significant, very respected, with a huge audience of millions of people around the world. So I think Jordan Peterson's tweet is very significant and great for our cause. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was actually quite shocked that he even made a comment on it. Never, because a lot of times, people will just kind of skirt the issue, or they don't really want to jump into it. But Jordan Peterson was here at a talk in, I believe it was in Edmonton, wasn't it? Or was it in Calgary? Like not long ago. And I know we had a few people go out and take and listen to it. And again, he talks about a whole wide range of topics. And only after the show and people got to go and talk to him in the back was the idea, or the idea proposed, that a lot of these issues that deal with the federal government and with the world government, if you want to call it that, and all of these issues go away if we become our own sovereign nation, right? Or at least become independent. And again, depending on how you want to do it within Canada or totally separate. We could definitely talk about that. And I know APP basically says, that basically it is, I'll read it again. Our purpose is to educate, inspire, and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect the prosperity, individual freedoms, rights, and sovereignty by empowering the Alberta government to restructure Alberta's relationship with Canada. And shy of not being able to do that, what other option do we have? Right? Yeah, we need more control. Yes, absolutely. Do you want to talk any more about the history stuff? Like, sure. Actually, there's something something I forgot. Well, I mean, something that I brought into the new talk. Like, this is one of the things that's new, and that had to do with, like, there's a woman named Dr. Ruth Gorman, and I doubt that very many people have ever heard of her, but she was one of the most prominent people in Alberta in the 20th century. Like, Dr. Ruth Gorman was one of the first female lawyers in Alberta, and she was a civil rights lawyer, and she became most well known working for First Nations people on their behalf. And she was very instrumental in what was called the Indian vote, like getting Indians the right to vote in 1960, because they didn't have the right to vote for that. So that was one of her main campaigns. So she was a civil rights lawyer. She got an honorary doctorate from the University of Calgary in 1966. And in 1967, which was Canada's centennial year, she was awarded the title Alberta's Woman of the Century. Like, she wasn't Alberta's Woman of the Year. She was awarded Alberta's Woman of the Century because she was so prominent and so well known. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is when one of the things that Trudeau did that I didn't mention, I mean, he also, besides attacking Alberta, he also, of course, repatriated and changed the Constitution and added the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that was actually occurring around the same time as the National Energy Program. But Dr. Ruth Gorman, her main issue was in opposition to Trudeau's Charter of Rights. And the main reason for that was the charter did not contain property rights. Like the
yes, yeah.
This is very, very significant for the movement at that time. Like the main independence party at that time was called the Western Canada Concept Party of Alberta, and Ruth Gorman was one of the founders of that party.
Yeah.
She wrote its constitution and did much of its legal work. That's how important it was to her. She helped found that party because she was so opposed to the Charter of Rights. She figured, that by leaving property rights out of the charter, that was diminishing our rights, as individuals. And in the context of the National Energy Program, which was happening at the same time, she really thought that was left out so that the federal government could take more of our stuff, take more of our property away. But she traveled the province speaking against the charter and writing, columns for like the Calgary Herald and the Edmonton Journal and other papers saying, we've got to stop Pierre Trudeau's charter because he's taking away our real rights and freedoms. And many Canadians and many Albertans forget, there was strong opposition to the charter. The charter, it's very popular now, and there was enough popularity at the time for Trudeau to get it through. But Trudeau first proposed it in 1968, and throughout the 70s, there was considerable opposition to it, and he couldn't get it through. And this is one of the things that makes the 1980 election so significant. If Pierre Trudeau had lost the 1980 election, we would not have had the National Energy Program, and we would not have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So I just throw that in there, to point out, elections are important. Elections have consequences. They can have long-term consequences in the context of this, this 1980 election that brought us both the National Energy Program and the Charter of Rights. But one of the main opponents of the charter, just to throw this in, was Manitoba Premier Sterling Lyon. He was a real small C conservative. He could only do so much, though. He was with the Gang of Eight provinces that were, opposed to the charter for most of the time. Anyway, I just wanted to put that note in for him because he's someone who deserves to be remembered for opposing Pierre Trudeau's charter, as some of the others did to one degree or another. But I wanted to put Ruth Gorman in there because she deserves, credit for the work that she did, in the movement at that time and traveling and speaking. And, at that time she was quite prominent, but she obviously she's passed on and everything. And so people don't remember her and remember what she did anymore. And to remind people that there has been historically lots of opposition to the charter in earlier years from people on the right side of the spectrum, from conservative-minded people who are concerned about property rights. Like that was the number one thing. If you have a constitutional document that does not contain property rights, it signals to the judges that the document does not restrict the government's powers as much as it should have. Like historically in the Anglo-American tradition, like in the words of philosopher John Locke, you're supposed to protect life, liberty, and property. That's what a constitution should do, protect life, liberty, and property. And the Canadian Constitution diverged from that historical tradition by not protecting property, thus signaling that it doesn't protect people the way that other historical constitutions have. Yeah. So, that's part of the history that should be added in there.
So having said that, it's technically not in the charter right now.
Right.
And so is that our Achilles heel that could actually come and hurt us? Because it's certainly see, I mean, we've talked about UNDRIP and some of those scenarios and how they're trying to basically take away our land or take away our property in certain ways, maybe guns and who knows what else, maybe cars next. And so, but it would actually having that in our charter, would that have helped?
Yes. I never thought of it in the context of UNDRIP or those kinds of things. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, we do have a certain degree of property rights. We just don't have constitutionally guaranteed property rights. So our property rights, they exist to a certain degree, but they're not as strong as the other rights that are in the charter. So if the property rights had been in the charter, then we would have much stronger defenses against the kinds of things you talked about. So that it does make a difference. It could make a difference in some of these cases at some point.
Do you know if there's any way to actually to put a constitutional challenge or put something back into the Constitution if we wanted to do that? Do you know what the process would be for that? Because I'm just thinking, again, we're looking at it as, can we use any leverage in Alberta? Can we possibly say, look, we'll stay in Canada if you can make these changes, right?
Yeah, property rights could be put in, but again, it's a constitutional amendment, so that means you have to have at least 7 provinces representing at least 50% of the population. And the thing is that some of the provinces were happy not to have property rights in because the provinces, the premiers, they're governments too, right? And they might want to take away people's property, and especially like when you have an NDP government, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's not obvious that the premiers would necessarily support that. So it wouldn't necessarily be easy to get 7 provinces on board, if you know what I mean.
That's right. Yeah.
So theoretically it could be done.
Yeah.
But practically it's very difficult to see how it could be.
Yeah.
But so I just tell people, if we became independent as a province, we could write our own constitution and we could avoid that problem.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, you're right. And then we can go through all this. And I believe APP has kind of drafted something up on their website. I'd have to really hunt it down, but I know they've definitely put in policies where a new government, if they were elected and they were independence minded, that they should adopt some of these policies. And they talk about what an ideal constitution would look like, or at least what those parts would be in there, right? Do you want to talk anything more? I'm kind of looking through some of these questions on here, and I know a lot of them we'll probably address when we have our next guest come on with us. But let me just see if there's something that's kind of glaring right now. Well, here's one. And this is kind of what everybody has in the back of their mind. What do you believe is holding people back from moving toward on sovereignty or independence? How bad do things have to get? My parents lost their house.
Yeah, well, see, one of the things that's holding people back for sure is that there is still an attachment to Canada. Like, and that's understandable. Like, you know what, I'm willing to say there's no question that Canada has been a great country, in many respects. It's in the history of the world, it's one of the freest, one of the most prosperous, one of the best countries in history. And I think that changed with Pierre Trudeau. I think he was the one who put us on the wrong path more than any other factor. I mean, there's other factors too, but people still do have an attachment to Canada. And when you start to talk about Alberta independence, there is that natural resistance. And you know what's kind of ironic is that a lot of the people who do support independence that I've met, they're actually the most patriotic Canadians. You know what I mean? I've been in a meeting.
I've got Canadian flags all over. I've got, I do wear any sports jersey that's Canada, because that's the way I am, right? And
absolutely.
So even having this idea go through my mind of, well, independence solves a lot of issues, then that would be a good thing to do, right?
Yeah. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And like I say, that's a completely legitimate thing. I mean, people are supposed to love their country. I mean, Canada has given us many things. And so there is that natural attachment. And that's one of the biggest factors, I think, that holds people back. And so, as I mentioned, like people like you, it's the most patriotic people who are also involved in the independence movement. You know what I mean? So it's not that they really, really want independence. Like, that's not the first choice for most people. Yeah. Like most people, the first choice was just to make things comfortable for us in Canada, so that we can live our lives, develop our resources, live the way we're supposed to live and not be interfered with by the federal government. Like that would be the first choice for most people. And so people tend to revert back to that. That's kind of like the default position for most people, right? Yeah. So something will happen and Trudeau will say something or do something that will just provoke people, and people will go, now it's time for independence. But that feeling of I don't know if it's anger or whatever, that will kind of dissipate over time, and they'll kind of step back from it again. So we tend to see the independence movement like come in waves, especially after, say, a federal election, like after the 2019 election. Then we had huge Wexit meetings. You know what I mean? Yeah. And then COVID came in and those meetings dissipated or whatever. But generally, it's provocations that lead to the growth of the movement, and then it kind of fades back. And I think the number one thing is that people love Canada. Also, there's also the thing of some people. Independence might seem like kind of a radical idea, you know what I mean? And so that would scare some people away. But I say, independence, there are some risks to independence. There's no question about that. But there's risks to staying in Canada too. So like there's no course of action that is free of risks. It's a matter of which risks are we going to let the federal government shut down our oil industry and we'll end up in poverty? Like that's the one side. The other side is become independent and try and make things on our own. But the key thing is, though, there's no safe alternative. But you got to choose. What do you think is best for the future of your children? If you really want this province to develop economically and thrive and have freedom, I really think independence is the way to do that. And so there are people who reason that way and are willing to favor independence. Of course, that's what drives the movement. But of course, like I mentioned, there's that feeling of attachment to Canada, and and like I say, it's legitimate. You got to love your country, but that holds a lot of people back, and it causes the movement to fade. from time to time. So
I know with APP we do these webinars every Wednesday. I think I've mentioned that, and with these weekly webinars, we usually have someone come on and have amazing knowledge on a particular topic. Like last week, they were talking about banking, and we've also talked about UNDRIP, and we've talked about land rights. We've talked about, actually, have we had one about guns yet? I think that's on slated, because again, that deals with property rights. But if you go back on the Alberta Prosperity Project, if you look on the YouTube channel or you go to Rumble, we have all our webinars on there, and to just look at one, you'd kind of go, you know what, we can live with it. But when you look at the history of what has gone on, and you look at all the issues that we've had, policing, and even comments like this about taking away our natural resources, I think it really opens up people's minds. So again, I can't say this enough. Share. Like if you're going to do anything, and while watching this, just press your share button wherever you're watching it. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Rumble, we're on Facebook. Just share the bejesus at it, and hopefully we'll get some people that are really knowledgeable and want to come in and spread the word and do stuff with APP. And speaking of knowledgeable, good segue. I'm going to bring our next guest in here, because he texted me earlier and said that he'd like to come on, and especially since we're talking about the whole idea of where the independence movement came from, and a man who needs no introduction, so I won't give him one. This is Dr. Dennis Modry. How are you, Dennis?
I'm excellent. Yeah, great to see you, Kerry. You always do a great job on these webinars. And
Thanks.
Michael, you and I have given many presentations together, and I enjoyed your comments tonight.
thank you.
But I do have a few comments.
Yeah.
One of them is, I wouldn't be too sanguine about David Lametti's comments about rescinding the Natural Resources Act. This federal government, I don't think, is above doing anything to compromise Alberta.
Yeah.
You know, you touched on the national energy policy earlier, Michael, and you rightly pointed out that the real purpose of it was to prevent Alberta from becoming the center of economic power in Canada. It was also used to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But getting back to David Lametti, remember what he said not too long ago. He said, Canadian citizens don't have the right to own property. Do you remember he said that? And you know, when you think about it, and you go back to, because you touched on the charter.
Yeah.
Well, Section 1 of the charter is one of the fundamental problems that we have with the Constitution. And for those people who don't remember what it is, it states charter rights can be limited by law so long as those limits can be shown to be reasonable in a free and democratic society. So that means the federal government can determine what is reasonable. And I'm pretty sure that everybody on this call doesn't believe that the federal government ever does anything that's reasonable, particularly with respect to Western Canada. Now, let's look at some evidence here with respect to what the federal government can do. So you'll recall the carbon tax. So the Alberta Court of Appeal ruled that the carbon tax was unconstitutional, right?
Yeah.
So what did the federal government do? They went and appealed it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled it was constitutional. Why? Because the federal government wrapped the argument around climate change, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now the federal government, it won't be beneath them to wrap themselves around what's coming next, which is the Impact Assessment Act. That is now before the Supreme Court. And that Impact Assessment Act, of course, really relates to Bill 69. Bill C-69, no more pipeline development. But the child of that, as well as also the Bill C-48, the tanker ban. So it's all connected. And so it'll be interesting to see how the Supreme Court rules on this. But my sense is they will wrap themselves around the climate argument once again and state that the Impact Assessment Act is legitimate and valid, and therefore it will carry on. It's not much of a step to go from there to then say we, the Canadian government, the Liberal government, the Trudeau government, the Trudeau communist government, must take control and get rid of the Natural Resources Transfer Act from 1930. Why? Because of the importance of climate change. So I wouldn't be too sanguine about the fact that it's not going to occur. But what's important here is to understand that I think we've already crossed a red line, but there's a very thick, very bright red line if the federal government tries to do that. And I think that Jordan Peterson has the right answer, minus the couple of words at the end, as you said, Michael. And that is the issue of Alberta independence and Alberta sovereignty. And I think it's worthwhile for your listeners to understand that there's an efficient, legal, pragmatic pathway out. And Michael, you're right that the appetite for Alberta independence, Alberta sovereignty has waxed and waned over the years. So what's going to compel Albertans to actually embrace it in an escalating fashion rather than an up and down Mickey Mouse kind of approach to it? I think personally that, the abridgment of your freedoms and rights is one thing. The abridgment of the very foundation of democracy, which is free speech, is yet another thing. And that's what we're facing with Bill C-11 and Bill C-18.
Yes.
And of course, property rights are embodied in the firearms confiscation legislation as well. And again, we shouldn't be too sanguine about what the provincial government in Alberta and in Saskatchewan have done with respect to their own legislation, because what the federal government does when they're not happy with a provincial government that does not follow provincial dictates or federal dictates and federal law is they withhold transfer payments. Mm-hmm. And so this is a very significant concern that for 118 years, the way Confederation is constructed is no provincial government has ever had, Alberta provincial government has ever had the power to negotiate with Ottawa from a position of strength. And so this imbalance of power persists. And what we've seen over our lifetime, Michael, you and I are closer to age, Kerry's younger.
I just look younger.
What we've seen is a progressive encroachment by the federal government of provincial constitutional authority. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going to end. I think it's going to continue. And we have to be cognizant that there's no guarantee that the federal Conservative Party is going to be reelected in the next election. In fact, they're not even leading in the polls, in some of the polls. So what actually can we do? Well, this whole concept of Alberta independence, when you look at the polls for the last 4 years, you'll see that the polls, and this speaks exactly to your point, Michael, over the past 4 years, when you conduct a poll in Alberta about the appetite for Alberta independence, that appetite has ranged from 20 to 50%, depending on the timing and where the poll was conducted. Yeah. But one of the more relevant ones that I like to refer to is that February the 4th, 2022 Angus Reid survey, in which across the country, the question that was posed, are you disillusioned with the federal government? Yeah. And in Alberta, 73% of Albertans were disillusioned with the federal government. In Saskatchewan, it was even higher at 76%. So what does that mean, really? Well, when you drill down on the 73%, you find that 33% want out, but 40% want a better deal with the Confederation. So when you pose the question, what does Alberta independence mean to you? For some people, it means Alberta stays in Canada, but with complete control of its wealth and affairs. For other people, it's Alberta stays in Canada with some control of its wealth and affairs. For other people, it's Alberta leaves and joins the US. For other people, it's Alberta leaves Canada and becomes an independent, sovereign constitutional republic. And that, yet again, Alberta leaves Canada with some or all of the other provinces and territories in the West and forms a new nation. Yeah. So when we did a poll internally with APP, we found that Alberta 51 and Alberta remaining in Canada, but with just some control of its wealth and affairs, finished dead last. But the other three were within the margin of error of 1 or 2%. So what does that really mean? Well, what it really means is that if you want to get to a successful referendum on independence, then you have to have all of these paradigms aligned with supporting a referendum on independence. Yeah. And ostensibly, 73%, if it stuck exactly to that poll, 73% of Albertans would vote in favor of Alberta independence, as long as they understood that a vote for independence doesn't necessarily mean that Alberta leaves Canada. And this is one of the important conundrums that we have trying to educate the public. Because when you talk about Alberta independence, and you touched on this earlier, Michael, many people think very patriotically they love Canada. There's no way they're going to vote for independence. Yet they hate the federal government. They hate what's being done. So you need to convince those people and point out to them in the Clarity Act, the fourth paragraph of the Clarity Act, which is triggered when you have a successful referendum on Alberta independence. As you know, it triggers the Clarity Act, provided, of course, that it achieves the hurdles within the Clarity Act, of course. But the fourth paragraph, and the Clarity Act really just forces negotiations. That's what it is. It's a tool. I've used this analogy before. If you want to open a can of soup, you need a tool. And that tool is a can opener. If you want to open and change the Constitution, there are 5 hurdles to change the Constitution, which make it impossible. But there is a tool that will open and change the Constitution, and that's a successful referendum on secession. Yeah. But the fourth paragraph is important for the people who don't want Alberta to leave Canada to understand. The last line of the fourth paragraph of the preamble states that negotiations might lead to secession.
That's right.
It doesn't mean that they will. It might mean that Alberta gets everything that it wants. So you can imagine if the provincial government, whatever government it is empowered with a successful referendum on secession, they now go to Ottawa and legally the provinces and the federal government have to negotiate with Alberta. And Alberta says, these are all the things that we want. We either get them after a period of, say, 8 or 12 months of negotiations, or we have the moral and legal authority to leave legally. And really, that's the legal, pragmatic way to do it. But how do you get there? Yeah. Well, there's 2 ways to get there. The provincial government itself, assuming that the UCP, and by the way, we are in an existential threat to our very way of life and to our future. If the NDP get in this next election, they will pass legislation. They've already said that they would do this. Rachel Notley said she would pass legislation to prevent there ever being a referendum on Alberta secession. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So if you want to be really hamstrung, vote for the NDP. If you, and I hope nobody on this call thinks that I'm advocating for voting for the NDP. I'm suggesting that you do not vote for the NDP because we want to have this secession referendum. But there's 2 ways to get to a secession referendum. The provincial government itself, and I'm going to make an assumption that it'll be the UCP subsequent to May 29th. Daniel Smith and the UCP could call for a secession referendum for a number of different reasons. One of them being, for example, the Impact Assessment Act going against us, the Supreme Court ruling against us. Another could be what David Lametti mused about, getting rid of the Natural Resources Transfer Act. These would be red lines that should not be crossed, that Danielle could, and the UCP government could ask for that referendum.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, it's always been in our power as voters to get there as well. And you touched on this, Kerry, earlier with respect to the Alberta voters supporting a petition to demand or to obtain a referendum on Alberta secession.
Yeah.
So right now it's 20% of the voting public, which is just over 600,000 signatories. As you pointed out, Michael, they have to be collected in 90 days. I think you pointed it out. Well, that's an impossible task to get 600,000 signatories on a petition to compel a referendum on Alberta secession.
And when you're saying the actual signatures, you are talking about physical signatures.
Well,
right?
not just I'm talking about the contact information, but for the petition, you need the signatures and you need the contact information.
Yeah.
So the way we figured out as part of APP to get around that was, let's get the message out that we need to collect the contact information for over 600,000 people in Alberta. Yeah. Once collected, then Jeff Rath, who's a constitutional lawyer, has already drafted the petition. So let's make an assumption that by 2025 or 2026 or maybe 2027, that we have over 600,000. Let's say we've got 800,000 signatories. Yeah. Sorry, we've got the contact information of 800,000 people. Jeff Rath then takes the petition, goes to Elections Alberta, and Elections Alberta certifies the petition and then organizes the canvassers to go out and get the signatories, to get 600,000+ signatories on the petition.
Yeah.
Now it makes it easy because APP can give to the canvassers the names of all of the people that have agreed to sign the petition. Yeah. They can be collected in 30 days, never mind 90 days, if you know who the people are already. Yeah. So under those circumstances, the petition gets signed by the sufficient number of signatories. It goes to Elections Alberta for certification, and then the provincial government must hold a referendum on secession. And do you not think that the provincial government wants to be empowered that way? Mm-hmm. You bet they do. But you know something? Government, MLAs, politicians, sometimes significantly lose their courage once they are in office, because they're there and the sense is, let's not rock the boat. Yeah. And that's part of the problem, that why we don't see anything happening. So it's easier for any provincial government to be empowered by the voters demanding that petition and that referendum, rather than the provincial government themselves asking the population for support for the secession referendum. Yeah. But realistically, it could occur in either circumstance, depending on what the federal government does to us. And the message and the education that people like Michael and others, myself included, and APP, TBOF, TBA, Alberta Free Inc., all of these different freedom groups, the education, getting the message out there. And part of the process is getting all of these organizations aligned. Let them do the things that they're all doing, but align on one thing: the necessity to empower the provincial government consequent to a successful referendum on secession.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what the outcome will be of those negotiations, but it sure will be a whole lot better than the dilemma that we're facing now. So, you know, there's my summary. So, Michael, you do a great job of giving the history. Here's a little bit of hope for everybody that there's actually a solution that bloody well can work, and it just needs to be executed. And it's a big challenge, and it's an expensive challenge to get the messaging out with the marketing and advertising and the content creation, etc. So, but it is definitely there, and here it is on the APP website. Thanks for bringing that up, Kerry.
Yeah. So basically, we've got about 11,000 signatures, and yeah, we want 600,000. So there have been a couple of questions about how do we sign this petition. Well, this is the way you go, and we'll call it pre-sign up or sign up in order to do the petition, right? You sign up, you give your.
Well, you see the way it says there. It says registration. Or register your intention to vote.
That's right.
So this is just registering your intention.
Yeah.
So it informs APP that the number of people that have signed on.
Yeah. And if you can imagine, within 90 days of getting this thing signed, let's say the rate is dropped, I don't know, September 1st, right? Well, basically we have until Christmas-ish in order to get this thing done. So how do we do that? Well, we've already got your name, your address, your phone number, right? That doesn't mean we need 100,000 people to go out and go bang on your door. We could even call you and say, guess what? We're going to be at such and such mall on Saturday. Come on down and sign it. Right. There are different ways that we could do that, but essentially that's the way that we could get 600,000 signatures done within.
Well, actually, just a correction there, Kerry. Elections Alberta has a process, and they select the canvassers to go out.
Okay.
So the canvassers have to be given. So you might have 1,000 canvassers, and so every canvasser has got a certain number of contact information, a certain number of people's contact information, and they can go directly to them in organized geographically. So we can make it very easy for the canvassers, but it's Elections Alberta that actually controls that.
Okay, so that I was mistaken on. And here's another question that a few of them have asked. Is there a way to get the requirements for the referendum changed, such as fewer signatures? Because I know, Dennis, you were even talking
with the petition. It's the petition.
Okay.
The referendum itself has to have a majority of a plurality of the voters in Alberta.
Okay.
So conceivably 50% plus one would do it. That was what Quebec had.
Yeah.
But I think it's safer to have 65% or greater in terms of those actually voting in the referendum. Yeah. So
do we know how many actual voters there are? There's roughly 4.4 million in Alberta.
Yeah, there's roughly 3.4 million voters.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. So you'd need pretty close to 2 million voters.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very doable, and it's the fastest and simplest way to do it.
Yeah, I think Corey Morgan talks about that in his book, The Sovereignist Handbook. He's probably I don't think I mentioned this idea, maybe, but when Corey was on a couple weeks ago, I think he talked about that. That might be where he talks. Right. Yeah, his book talks about these kinds of issues, and I think he favors changing the legislation to make it easier for these citizen initiatives. And
something that's not a bad idea, but you got to think of it from the other perspective. Instead of having fewer number of people voting on the petition, I would almost argue have more, because the point is, if you have 620,000 signatories on the petition, but you need 2 million people voting in the referendum, the more people who support the petition, the more people who are likely to support the referendum as well.
Yeah.
So getting the 600,000, 620,000, or whatever the exact number is, signatories on the petition is not an impossible task at all. it's a little bit more work ahead of time, but APP and Michael, you and others are already doing it. This is why there's already 11,000, just about 11,000 people that have signed on.
And likewise, I know we have a goal of having 1 million members in APP, and yes, that's quite the goal to get there. But you know, with APP, we're asking for memberships, and I know we've had this conversation with people that have met us at meetings, and you know, maybe they just can't afford the $20 or whatever, and that's okay. You don't have to. Just, you know, reach out to us. Let us know that you want to be involved. And we'll get you in contact with your chapter, and you can basically get involved that way. So I would almost, like, if we have 10,000 members of APP, I would almost say we probably have 12, if not more, because there's a lot of people that are still involved that just have not bought memberships.
Well, the other thing, Kerry, that I think is really exciting to understand is that there are over 800,000, maybe 900,000 now, engagements and followers on social media.
You're right. Absolutely.
You know? So that's an exciting thing to recognize, because you know, it's just like, you know, when the UCP were elected in the last election, they had 120,000 members, but there were 1.2 million people or 1.4 million people that voted for them. You know, so we've got a lot more support than we do members, but members help us help APP with the educational process.
That's right.
You know, we'll look after Michael's expenses when he's traveling.
First class.
Justifiable when you're driving all around this amazing province.
I did want to show you what the reach is. We were running stats even on our own website, but I mean, we kind of bashed, you know, APP and our own stuff together, and it's impressive to actually look when you look at a map of people who have actually watched the APP shows, right? Primarily North America, yes, but like it's literally touched everywhere except for this big blank spot up here. But it is amazing how many people are out there interested in what's going on in Alberta, right?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important for APP and the freedom movement and all the organizations involved with the freedom movement to be successful, to bring Alberta empowered with that secession referendum, because I think we can be an example for the world. We can be the tip of the spear to burst this socialist, Marxist, communist bubble that's enveloping society, and you know, because of the tremendous natural resources and the entrepreneurial spirit, work ethic, can-do attitude that Albertans have. That is why this is probably the #1 region in the world that can pull this off.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. We definitely could be independent. You know, there's a lot of other states, there's a lot of other countries that, you know, the fact that they're already countries and they have to import everything, and you know, we're in a pretty unique position. We could survive doing a lot of stuff. And I know, Dennis, you've talked about this before, and do you mind, let's just assume no one has ever heard you speak before. And could you, in maybe like 5 minutes, and I know that's a tough call to say, but do you think you could go through the examples that you give in terms of policing and pension and all that? Because I think that really drives home why independence is such a big thing.
Right. So there are five key things that the Alberta government can do that does not require a petition, does not require a referendum. That is to take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. So why take control of policing? Well, #1, then we're not controlled by our police force is not controlled by the Crown. It's controlled by Alberta.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is why we need to get rid of the RCMP. Second, the rural community is poorly served, and it will be served better by our own provincial police force. Third, the cost would be far less now with an Alberta-based police force. When Deloitte did the study, to look at the cost of replacing the RCMP. They said it was going to cost something like $80 or $120 million more.
Yeah.
But what they didn't do is they didn't take into account the cost of the federal bureaucracy. So why this is important to understand is that when private enterprise provides a product or a service and it costs $1, when the federal government provides that product or service, it costs $3.
Yeah.
So in fact, it would cost less, and we'd have a more efficient and effective police force and safer environments with our own police force. So that's the reason for the police force. And the provincial government has been advocating for that. 2, pensions. Why take control of pensions? Well, simple. We overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year, and those $3 billion could be used better by our pensioners here in Alberta. But there's another important reason. Many people don't understand that the federal pension plan is underfunded by at least 30%. So that means that the federal government has little to no capacity to increase pensions over the coming years, and may in fact cut pensions or not provide pensions for some people at all. So that is a potential. And then of course there's employment insurance. We overfund employment insurance by $1 billion a year. Again, that's a waste. And next is the issue of taking control of immigration. Why? Simply because we want immigration. We're not, Albertans generally are not opposed to immigration. We just want immigration to fill the needs, the skills, the trades, that Alberta requires. Mm-hmm. And there are many businesses that are suffering as a consequence of not having the number of employees that they need, because the trades, the skills are not here right now, or the professionals are not here right now. And then finally, taking control of provincial tax collection. We take control of corporate tax collection now, but there's no reason that we shouldn't take control of provincial tax collection as well. It doesn't require much more in terms of increasing the provincial bureaucracy. Now, that doesn't allow us to take control of federal taxation, because that's another matter. But those 5 things can be done, and they can be done within 18 to 24 months. Yeah. So subsequent to the May 29th election, assuming that the UCP are elected, they will very likely take control of those 5 things. What they can't do, because we don't have the leverage, is we can't take control of federal taxation. Mm-hmm. And why is that important? Because we give about $60 billion a year to the federal government. We only get back 27.
Yeah.
So he who has the gold rules. So this is why it's so darn important for us to have control of federal taxation. That requires constitutional change. That requires leverage. That requires empowering the provincial government with a secession referendum. Mm-hmm. As we go down the line of that which requires leverage, it also includes ending equalization. We need leverage. Yep. Ending the carbon tax requires leverage. Ending Bill C-69, Bill C-48, the pipeline and tanker bans, requires leverage. Getting control of our healthcare system, which functions in the lowest quartile of quality at the highest quartile of cost, also requires leverage to get out from under the suffocating constraints of the Canada Health Act. And then, of course, there's also the issues that I touched on earlier, the issue of free speech, Bill C-11, Bill C-18, to get out from under the censorship ban. That requires leverage as well. Mm-hmm. And we may find sooner rather than later that we've got the darn problem of the Firearms Act, in which the federal government withholds transfer payments because Alberta and Saskatchewan's not compliant with the collection of firearms. Mm-hmm. So, and then we're looking at the issue of the just transition. How do we prevent that? That requires real clout. Then we're looking at this Impact Assessment Act that's coming at us, that the Supreme Court will probably rule in favor of the federal government. That requires clout to get out from under. So you see what can be done when you have leverage. Yeah. And the 5 things that I mentioned don't require leverage. They just require the courage of the provincial government to take control of policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, provincial tax collection. Taking control of those other 10 or 12 things requires real clout, real leverage, real power. And that's what the voters of Alberta can do for ourselves by empowering the provincial government. It's really not complicated to think about it. It's really simple. I give you the power, you negotiate with Ottawa what we want, period. That's it. And that's the way the voters got to think. I will empower you to protect my interests, my freedoms, rights, prosperity, and self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
Bang. There it is.
Yeah.
That's what we got to work towards. And the WEF-UN has got Agenda 2030. Why don't we have Agenda 2026 or Agenda 2027? Mm-hmm. Okay. As the timeline for our referendum.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. We should.
Well, that's what we should do. And that's what we get all of our independence movements working together on Agenda 2026 or Agenda 2027. Yeah. So
I don't like that term, but let's call it Freedom Agenda or
call it Freedom
Separation Agenda or something to that.
Or you could call it Alberta's Agenda.
Alberta Agenda.
Alberta
like
Agenda. Alberta Agenda 2026.
Yeah.
2027.
That's right. Yeah. Lots of comments.
Flex our muscle.
That's right. Comments like, great work. Can we find that information other than just people saying what you just said? Well, again, join APP, get out to a chapter meeting, talk to people like-minded, and then find out what's happening with your constituency associations out in your riding, your CA, in terms of who to vote for. And because we're now down to, I haven't even worked out the math on it. Is it 52 days? 58 days, something like that.
One response to Ron Krapko's comment about the information is go to the website and look up the Clarity Act. And the Clarity Act will give you the information as the legal pathway. The Clarity Act was drafted by the Supreme Court in response to the federal government's request. It was called the Quebec Secession Reference. That's what it's called, the Quebec Secession Reference. And basically, the federal government asked the Supreme Court, does a province have the legal right to leave Canada? And the Supreme Court came back with the answer, which is yes, and here's the pathway to do it. Yeah. So Ron, you can look that up in terms of the Clarity Act. If you want the information regarding the petition and go to the Elections Alberta website, and it explains there, how a referendum needs to be conducted. And so it's there. And it's the Citizens Initiative Act. If you look up the Citizens Initiative Act, that is the legislation that defines the petition to change the Constitution.
And who actually brings that up in legislature? Is it any MLP or an MLA can do that, or is it like an actual citizen makes?
Well, the Citizens Initiative Act was passed last spring, a year ago.
Okay.
And so you can look it up. It's basically the law.
Yeah.
And you can trigger the Citizens Initiative Act by the process that I mentioned, by garnering over 600,000 signatories on a petition for a referendum. Yeah. So
if I could just throw in for source of information, I mentioned Corey Morgan's got a book, The Sovereignist Handbook, which talks also about the information about referendums and citizen-initiated referendums. Yeah. And for information about the secession reference decision and the Clarity Act, I'll plug my own book, And No Other Option has a chapter on that. So depending on which kind of information you want, there's also books available on Amazon.
Yeah.
Definitely. There's Michael's books right there. No Other Option, Self-Determination. And
went past it,
they did fly by.
There you go.
Yeah. Separation or Separatism Then and Now.
Yeah. And also Corey Morgan's book isn't there, but it's on Amazon.
Oh yes. Yeah. And actually, we had I could hunt him down as well, but it's just under CoreyMorgan.com, and you are under michaelgwagner.net.
Right. Okay. There, Dennis has Corey's book there.
Oh yeah, there it is. That's exactly
Perfect.
it. Actually, I have one around here too.
Oh, good. I've got one upstairs. I've read it. It's very, I recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Dennis, and giving a little bit of insight and what's going on with that. I'm gonna kick you off now, and we'll get back to Michael.
Dealing with Michael though, because Michael's a great guy.
Thank you.
You know, just one other thing. You know,
Yes.
you've heard the line. You've heard the line. If you don't know history, you're destined to repeat it.
Absolutely.
Right? You know, and if we want to repeat all the crap that we've gone through, then don't understand history.
Yeah.
You know, and just think everything's going to be, you know, wonderful going forward. But if you understand what's happened to us, and if you have some understanding of what's coming at us, and what's happening to us right now, you know, then maybe you'll be motivated to help the movement.
Yeah. No.
You know, so.
Absolutely agreed.
All right. Adios.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Dennis. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night there. That wasn't rude, was it? You know, it's great having Dennis on, especially to fill the gaps on a lot of those questions. And I knew we would get comments about, you know, oh, we're landlocked and what can we do? What would be the first things that we should end up doing? And I mean, he laid them out, you know, and you know, the whole taxation, police, pension, et cetera, et cetera. And because I get those comments from people, let's just say NDP supporters, right? And they were like, well, the only way we're going to get a better pension is to vote in the NDP. And it's like, well, wait a minute. No, we've got another solution. Why don't we just take hold of our pension? Why don't we actually have control over it? And a lot of people don't even, well, we can't do that because it goes to the federal government. What if we had our own federal government, right? And especially when you hear out the numbers of, you know, $3 billion is wasted on pension contributions per year going out to the feds, right? So bureaucracy. And the amount of money that we spend or that we give in terms of taxation, equalization payments out to the feds, who then distribute it back out to Quebec and let's just say the have-not provinces. We won't say Quebec is a have-not, but according to their books, they're a have-not province. And then we get back like 27. So, I mean, we're net negative 33. Like, imagine if we kept that amount of money in our province every single year. Just imagine that, right? I know there were people that actually sent me messages. I think it was last week. I don't know if you heard what's happening at West Edmonton Mall. Now, granted, in the next few years, but Universal Studios is actually taking over West Edmonton Mall, and they're taking one whole half of it. I'm going to say it's probably the half with Sears on it, you know, that dingy side. They're going to level it all, and I believe, and I could be wrong, but not by much, they're putting $7.1 billion into that mall and creating a giant amusement park. Yeah, Universal Studios. We would be able to do 4 of those, if not 5, every single year if we kept our money here. Put that in perspective, right?
Yeah, there's so much money involved. Yeah. But I just want to, if I can just tie it back to what Dennis was saying at the end there, that's kind of the key message that I have heard in terms of history. And actually it plays into that lady's question you had on there earlier about, you know, the movement coming and going. Part of that is because we have forgotten the history. And it's a natural thing to forget our history, right? Because we've always got things that are happening right now. We got to deal with what's happening right now, and we forget what's happened before. But the case for independence is so much stronger if you see the history. It's like, you know, we forgot about the National Energy Program to some degree. We forgot about the CF-18 issue, you know.
That's right.
And this is a pattern. That's the importance. One of the main important points of the history is we see a pattern, the way the West has been treated, and in particular, the way Alberta gets beaten up on every so often. And if we don't know there's a pattern, you know, it's much easier to accept what's going on now and say, well, this is just a phase we'll go through. We'll vote Conservative next time and it'll all be over with. Well, no. If you vote Conservative, you know, that would improve things probably, but it's not going to solve the problem because this problem has happened sometimes under Conservative governments as well. So to really understand the case for independence, you really have to see the history to see how many times Alberta's been beaten up, how many times people have tried to improve Alberta's position within the system and it hasn't worked.
That's right.
So if we've had the same pattern going on for decades, we realize, well, now we got to do something different than what we've done before, and pursuing independence is the way, to do that.
Yeah, I started when I was talking about the prime ministers. I started Joe Clark, and then I got lost in my notes because I'm terrible penmanship. But I wanting to get into the point about we have done this before. We've done this many times. We've done Joe Clark. We've done like we said, Preston Manning. We've done Brian Mulroney, Stephen Harper, right? And then Stephen Harper, Canadian boy, and then Pierre Poilievre. If he ends up getting elected. It's still the power is through central Canada.
Yeah.
And no matter what everybody says about, oh, Pierre's going to save us and it's all going to be good. No, because we've done this before. How many times do you have to keep banging your head against the wall?
Yeah. And, even let's take the best case scenario with Pierre Poilievre. Let's give the best case scenario. Yeah. He's only in power for a few years. And then we're back to the Liberals.
That's
so
right.
The best he gives us is a reprieve. Maybe Pierre will give us a 5-year reprieve, maybe, right? Yeah. We don't. That's the best case scenario. Yeah. But then we're back to the Liberals, and we're going to get beaten up again.
That's right.
So Pierre, he's at best a temporary solution. Like the Conservative Party, I've said, is a band-aid solution for our problems.
That's
it's
right.
not. It's not a real solution. It's a temporary, short-term solution. Yeah. So it does make things better. We're better off with a Pierre Poilievre than with a Justin Trudeau. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
But it's a temporary solution, and that's the best case scenario. Is we get a temporary reprieve.
That's right. I'm going to say a bit of a joke that no one's going to laugh at, but we could say the same thing about Alberta. If NDP's voted in, it's only going to last for 4 years.
That's a 4-year nightmare. It's hard to laugh at that.
we've done that before, and hopefully we're not going to be able, not going to do that again. Right? The amount of stuff that we're still feeling, pipelines. We really need to be focusing on independence, because let's just say, NDP gets in, the whole economy is a disaster, blah blah blah. And then we vote in another PC or that type of government, we're still going to be doing that same cycle over and over and over again, right? And so, great, 4 years might be good, 4 years are bad, 4 years bad, 4 years good. You know what? The only way that we can get out of this would be independence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, any final thoughts you want to say to all our viewers out there? We've got 221 viewers right now. We've dropped a little bit, but that's okay. It always happens after about an hour and a half, and we're at 1 hour and 31 minutes. So, do you want to have any last thoughts here?
Actually, like nothing that I haven't said before. I just want to emphasize how important it is to know the history if you really want to understand the case for Alberta independence.
Yeah. Go pick up Michael's books. And are they only paperback or
just paperback? Well, actually, no other options on Kindle on Amazon.
Oh, okay. Yeah. There is an option on Kindle. Sorry,
no other option.
Other option is on Kindle.
Yeah, on Amazon. Yeah.
Isn't that funny how the English language works? There's no other option. There's no other option on Kindle.
There's no other options. Right? I guess I said it wrong.
It's that inflex. Let me just go back and see if we have any questions. Again, put them 3 question marks, and then that way when I quickly scroll back through, as I'm doing right now, I can probably flag them. And it's always great to have Michael on and a conversation and learn the history. And like you said, it's you need to know your history in order to chart your own future and see what mistakes we've done, right? And especially, there are things that it's almost like the government or media covers up stuff. They want us to forget what has happened in the past, right? And now that we keep this fresh, like I said, share this and get people engaged in what APP are doing. Here's a question. I think we have answered this. Dennis or Michael, what are your thoughts on attaining a provincial constitution? Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, if we became independent, we'd have to have a constitution as a new country.
Yeah.
But I think it's theoretically possible to have a provincial constitution, but it would be subordinate to the Canadian Constitution. So I'm not sure how effective it would be. I guess I really can't comment about how effective it would be if Alberta stayed within Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, it's probably doable, but like again, it would be subordinate to the Canadian Constitution. Unless if we become independent, then of course we have to have our own constitution, and we could make a good one if we wanted.
Yeah. There was a few people asking that provincial constitution thing, so I just wanted to show that there was more than just one doing that. And that was the one that we asked already. Here's one. Just because we can answer these. Since APP has a big audience, will they be addressing the outright lies against Smith? If Notley gets in, there's zero chance of a referendum. Notley, her boss, and Trudeau will eliminate 887,000 jobs in oil and gas. Never mind every business they spend on the check. Alberta will not be the option of the prosperity separate if the NDP Liberal Alliance gets Alberta. And that's very true. So I think one of the lies that we had talked about was I guess they're trying to go after the idea of healthcare, and that you'd have to pay for your own doctor and you'd have to pay for your own surgeries and all that. No, you know what? There is really no basis for that. And anything that I've read, Premier Smith has basically said, no, that's not even in the cards. We will still have, you'll still be able to see a doctor. You will still get basic surgeries, or even, I guess, you know, if you're in an accident and you need a surgery, or if you're a cancer treatment or something like that, that's still covered, right? And that is not going to go away at all. So again, another scare tactic that the NDP seems to be coming up, right?
Yeah, and of course, the NDP is supporting the Trudeau government in power.
Yeah.
So a vote for Notley is a vote for Justin Trudeau. There's no question about that.
Yeah, that's right too. Let's join in with Parti Québécois. Let Quebec go, and we, the West, will have a much stronger platform. Why not? What have we got to lose? You know, at this point, there's a lot of ideas have been thrown around. And yeah, so we have something out in the East and something out in the West. So, and I've said this on the show many times, growing up in Winnipeg and growing up in Manitoba, I was always shocked that we would basically have our polls or our voting done or before they'd even hit Manitoba, right? Like an hour ahead, and it's like, oh, the Liberals have won, and it's like, wait a minute, our polls haven't even closed. And again, it comes down to how many seats there are and what the what, you know, where the number, well, yeah, the number of seats, where the population is, et cetera, right? So if we were to do something in terms of all West, to me, that almost makes more logical sense. Growing up in Winnipeg, we used to go to Lake Country. So Lake Country is practically, you can't spit without hitting a lake in Winnipeg or in Manitoba. But in northern Ontario, it's the same thing. So we've got Kenora, Dryden, Thunder Bay, and probably, you know, west of that, the Lake of the Woods area. To me, that has always felt like it's been part of Manitoba, right? It's kind of that, just, it feels it's the same people, same conversations you have with them. And then you end up going all the way out to BC. And other than the lower mainland, if you get up into, we'll call it northern, I mean, Smithers Terrace, all that sort of stuff, Prince Rupert, all that seems to be more Western minded. Right. Mm-hmm. And to me, that would be a logical division. Right. But it's difficult to even get one province, never mind, you know, 4, 5.5 in order to do that sort of thing. So ideas are out there. There's no question about that. Right. How does the APP attract other Canadians to move to Alberta to strengthen their movement? That's a very good question. Again, APP is not a political party. We're a more educational vehicle. And would people move specifically just to join a non-political movement? I don't know. I guess it depends. Like if you're coming from Ontario and you're just upset with what's going on in Ontario, there's a lot of places here that you could buy, a lot of land. You could definitely move. You could uproot your family and start anew, and that would be great. and maybe if the people that don't agree with us, they could get out. And then the balance works out that way. Do you have any comments on that, Mike?
No, I mean, Alberta, I think, has a natural attraction just because of the prosperity.
Yeah,
that'll change if the NDP gets in. That we won't be able to attract as many people then.
That is true, because that's basically what happened last time, right?
Yeah.
There were corporations that closed. There things were put on hold. Pipelines, construction projects. And again, I there are some ideas that the NDP have that are good in terms of maybe some of the union stuff, or maybe and again, but it's not what I would expect to be prosperous, right? It's prosperous for the people that are in power, the people that would be in government, the people that would be running the unions, but it's definitely not prosperous for the rest of us. And I think that's the big thing, is the whole idea behind Alberta Prosperity Project is to make all Albertans prosperous, right? So,
right.
Well, there you go. So I think that's what we're going to wrap it up at. Again, thank you so much, Michael, for coming on. Always great. I'm not sure when I'll see you next. I'm not sure what other. Do you have any other speaking events going on, or do you know?
I might be speaking. I think I'm speaking in Didsbury in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
for Catherine.
yeah.
But yeah, well, I want to thank you for having me on. It's been great to be here,
yeah,
and it's good to be with you.
Yeah, please, any time we can rope you on and get you on here to talk about a little bit of history and see where where we were and where we're going. That's amazing. So, and with that, I do want a couple of quick things. Obviously, thanks to the viewers for staying online and watching and listening and engaging and asking questions and comments. Please, if you, even when we sign on, or even if you watch it in the next couple of days, again, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Rumble, we're on Facebook. Put comments in. I do try and get back to them over the next couple of days. After about a week, it's a little difficult to go back to a week-old show. But if we don't answer your question, you could always ask it the next week, and that works. We do have these weekly APP webinars every Wednesday. Unfortunately, I don't have the schedule for next Wednesday. I'm going to ask Walter if he's available. Maybe he'll let me know who's coming on. And again, we wouldn't be able to do this without the volunteers. We have such an incredible volunteer base through APP. We've got through our chapter events. We are getting more into the summer, so I know there'll be more events coming up. And just on cue, Walter said Jeff Rath is on next week. So Jeff Rath, constitutional lawyer, and I'm sure he'll be talking about maybe our own constitution if we were to be an independent republic nation or something like that. And again, if we're always looking for help and volunteers, and if you have time and experience and a skill set to help us, please don't hesitate to contact us through the albertaprosperityproject.com website. And that will be it. I will wish you guys all a fabulous rest of your evening. Once again, thank you very much, Michael. And we hope to see you at a APP chapter event in person, or maybe next week online for a next webinar. So with that, take care. God bless. Good night, everybody. Look at that. The powers of replaying something. My hair has changed. My shirt has changed. Well, thank you again for sticking around and watching. I know that when we do these replays, it really is looking back in a time capsule. So taking notes of what has changed since we did that in April. Just so you know, we had a provincial election in May. And by no means this is in chronological order. We had the United Conservative Party annual general meeting happen in November. A lot of stuff happened with that. The Alberta pension plan was announced. So they're looking at doing it as a referendum. We're going to be doing events come January and February. So make sure you look at the Alberta Prosperity Project website in terms of the events page, and you'll see what's going on there. We also had an announcement of Grand Prairie doing their own policing. They're looking into that. C-69, the no more pipelines bill, was ruled unconstitutional. There's been a lot of stuff that has happened over this last year. And sadly, something that is still going on is the Coots 4 are still in jail, still in remand. So that's a whole other topic. And there's so many great people out there, Mocha and Jason Levine, and I know Chris and I have talked about that too. Narrowing down these top 10 webinars. One of them was with Catherine Kowalchuk and Granny Mackay talking about the Coots Force. So we're going to be posting the list of those, and those are kind of like the cream of the crop, if you want to call it, out of the 40 plus episodes that we did this year. And we've got 10 that are so good that we want to definitely get them out there, and especially these last 3. So we had this one here, which was absolutely amazing with Michael Wagner and Dr. Dennis Modry talking about at the state of independence. Really, next week we've got Marty up north, who is a podcaster and Twitter guru in terms of the knowledge that he spews out, and we're going to be talking about should we even stay in Canada, and what is the benefit in really staying in Canada? So that's another great one. So that's next week. That's December 27th. And then on January 3rd, we've got Tanner Today coming back on, and we're going to talk about the Alberta Pension Plan, which again was one of those things that was announced this year. And yeah, I'm actually looking forward to hearing and doing the debates on it. And with that, you could probably tell I'm wearing a little bit of a Christmas sweater here. Look at this. Yeah, I'm full of coal. I should just put my coal in there. So anyways, I got my Christmas sweater on. I'm wishing everybody a fantastic, amazing Merry Christmas 2023. And we will be back next week. I'll be back again. And don't forget, I'm going to just quickly post this thing down here again. We've got the Chris and Kerry Show New Year's Eve going on in Red Deer on New Year's Eve on next Sunday. It's only 2 Sundays from now. And by all means, I mean, if you can, come on out. Just go to the chrisandkerryshow.com. And if you're an APP member and you enter in the code NYE2024, you save $24 a ticket. So pre-sales are until Friday. They're $99, but for APP members, just for you guys, because I love you so much, $75 bucks. There you go. And with that, I'm going to just put this on. There you go. I know I'm a little bit early for this, but there you go. I'm a little bit early for that. I'm so excited about not only Christmas, but New Year's as well. So you guys all have an amazing night, and we will see you next week. Merry Christmas. And if I don't see you next week, Happy New Year as well. And I'm just going to log us out here. You guys take care. And thanks again for being here every Wednesday and not allowing me just to talk to my computer. Actually have a conversation with you guys. All right. Good night.